What's up everyone, James here with New Adventure Films, and today I'm going to show you how to get incredible time-lapse and hyperlapse videos from your Mavic 4 Pro drone. The same techniques the pros use. Drone time-lapses are created by capturing a sequence of photos at set time intervals while the drone is stationary, whereas hyperlapses are time-lapses created while the drone is in motion, creating a dynamic sense of movement throughout the scene. In this tutorial, I will show you the different types of hyperlapses, how to create and edit them, and the best settings and pro tips to get amazing results. I will also compare time and hyperlapses auto-created by the drone to ones created manually using the same drone pictures in Adobe Premiere Pro. Let's get started. To create a time-lapse or hyperlapse, switch to the photo mode on your drone controller. Make sure you're shooting in RAW mode and at the highest megapixel settings the lens will allow. In this case, I'm shooting with a medium telephoto lens, so 48 megapixels is the highest setting. Then move down to hyperlapse and select it. To take a time lapse, simply position your drone to where you want it to be, then press freeform. Next, set the photo interval to 1 to 2 seconds. Shorter intervals produce smoother, more cinematic time and hyperlapse footage. Intervals of 4 seconds or longer tend to make the final video look choppy. For the best results, you want the motion to feel fluid and consistent during playback. Next, set how long you want the time lapse to last. If you set a time longer than the drone's battery will last, it will let you know. However, you can always stop the time lapse at any time by pressing the shutter button, so longer is better as the drone seems to always underestimate its own battery life. Another important thing to keep in mind is that the drone only creates time lapses and hyperlapses at 25 frames per second, and all the drone settings are based on that frame rate. However, if you're like me and plan to edit those photos later in a 30 frame per second timeline, you'll need to compensate for the missing 5 frames per second. To do that, you must set a longer capture time on the controller, so you end up with enough images for a 30 frames per second edit. This chart will help you choose the correct shooting length to match a 30 frame per second timeline. For example, if you want your final video to be 30 seconds long, you'll need to set the drone time lapse to shoot for at least 36 seconds. Next, using manual camera settings, set your ISO as low as possible. Then set your shutter to 1/2 second or less to get a smoother video playback. Then set your aperture to 2.8. In this case, I'm using the medium telephoto lens, which is automatically fixed at 2.8, so I don't need to change anything. Next, try different strength ND filters to get your exposure even. The typical set of ND filters comes with an ND 8, 16, 32, and 64, but you're going to need a much stronger ND filter for daylight. I typically use an ND 1000 for bright daylight time lapses to get my shutter speed to 1/15 of a second. And finally, press the red button to start the time lapse, and don't touch the sticks. The drone will now take a series of pictures and automatically stitch them together into a video. If you're nearing the end of your time lapse and you have more battery life left, every time you press the +1 button, you will add 1 second to your video. And if you're almost out of battery life and need to land your drone, just press the red button to stop taking pictures and the drone will create a video of the pictures it already took. Here's the crop stabilized 25 frames per second time-lapse created by the drone from the JPEG images it took. It looks grainy and choppy on my 30 frame per second timeline. Here's the same time-lapse at 30 frames per second, but it was cropped, stabilized, and created by me from the raw images the drone took. Side by side on a 30 frame per second timeline, you can see the 25 frame per second time-lapse created by the drone staggers, whereas the 30 frame per second timeline created by me has smooth playback. Stopping the playback, you can see that in the time-lapse created by the drone with JPEGs, the highlights in the clouds are blown out, whereas the raw images time-lapse created by me retains its highlights. I will show you how you can change hyperlapse frame rate in the editing process later in the video. There are 4 different ways to create a hyperlapse: free, circle, course lock, and waypoint. In free mode, you set the picture duration and fly the drone yourself. In my opinion, free should just say time-lapse, as it's the only mode you can create a time-lapse with, and it's nearly impossible to make a hyperlapse that looks good while controlling the drone yourself. I never use it for professional hyperlapses, so I won't cover it here. A circle hyperlapse is created when the drone automatically flies in a smooth circle around a subject or point you choose. You control the photo interval, the total duration of the hyperlapse, the drone's flight speed, and whether it rotates clockwise or counterclockwise. To create a circle hyperlapse, first select photo mode, then hyperlapse, then circle. Next, select an interval of 1 or 2 seconds. If your drone does 1 second, select that. If not, select 2. Next, select the length of the hyperlapse. Circle hyperlapses are difficult to time as the drone may not complete the circle if it's too far away from the central object and not traveling fast enough, the time lapse is not long enough, your picture interval is too long, and you don't have enough battery life. You need to set the hyperlapse time higher just to make sure the drone will go all the way around the object you select if that's what you want. If you are running out of battery life, you can always stop the hyperlapse before the circle is complete by pressing the red shutter button. For cinematic video playback, keep the drone speed as low as possible, around 1.1 miles per hour or less. And finally, draw a box on the screen of the area you want to be in the center of the circle. Then press the red record button. Here's the video we just created from the settings we put in the drone. I created an app that calculates how long it will take to fly your drone around a selected central object. To use it, first fly your drone to the object and note the distance shown on your controller. Enter the value into the distance to object field, then enter the speed you plan to fly. The app will instantly tell you how long it will take to complete either a full circle or a half circle orbit around the object. I'll include a link to the app in the description below. Okay, some tips for getting great circle hyperlapses. First, set a larger area for the center of the circle to get a smoother video. Just know that you probably won't have enough battery life to make a complete circle. Compared to the last circle hyperlapse of me on the hill, I drew a much larger area for the center of the circle this time, and the video was a lot smoother, but I was not able to fly a complete circle at the speed I set of 1.1 miles per hour, which was my plan because I would have run into a mountain as collision avoidance does not work in the dark. Also, for circle hyperlapses, having moving cars in the scene adds a lot to the motion of the video. If you fly too close, too fast, or set the picture interval too long, the effect is dizzying and stutters. Fly too low and the ground will bounce around. A course lock hyperlapse is when the drone flies in a straight line, maintaining the height and direction you set. You choose the flight speed, photo interval, and total duration of the hyperlapse. You can also set a point of interest by selecting it on the screen, allowing the gimbal to stay focused on it as the drone flies past, or you can leave the gimbal facing straight ahead in the direction of travel. The distance the drone will travel will depend on your time-lapse time settings as well as the picture interval you set. So the longer the interval, the further the drone will fly to get the required time. To see how far and where the drone will travel, tap on the map in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. The red dot shows where the drone will stop. To create a course lock hyperlapse, go to photo mode, then hyperlapse, then course lock. Next, set your picture interval to 2 seconds. Next, set the duration you want your hyperlapse to be. Next, set your speed below 1 mile per hour for smooth video playback. Finally, tap the lock icon to lock in your course and press the record button. Here's the course lock hyperlapse with the settings we just entered. This course lock video was set to a 2-second interval. This course lock video was set to a 5-second interval, showing much faster motion. A few pro tips for course lock hyperlapses. The key is to see both the ground and the sky moving, so it's best not to fly the drone too high as you won't see any forward motion. If you fly the drone too low, the ground will look shaky. Also, it's better to do this type of shot on partially cloudy days to see cloud movement as well as ground movement, or the shot will just look like a normal video shot. With waypoint hyperlapses, you set the different waypoints for the drone to fly to, then set the interval between pictures, then set the length of the hyperlapse. The speed the drone will fly is determined by the total distance the drone needs to travel and the interval in pictures. The length of the hyperlapse you can set will vary depending on the distance the drone is flying and the picture interval. You can also reuse waypoints that you have set in the past, reflying the same area. To set up a waypoint hyperlapse, go to picture mode, then move down to hyperlapse, then select waypoint. Fly your drone to the location that you want to start your sequence, then press the first plus icon. Then fly to the next location and press the next plus icon, and so on. I usually only use 2 waypoints as the more complex you make it, the worse the hyperlapse looks. Once you finish selecting your waypoints and other settings, the drone will slowly fly back to the first waypoint you set. To conserve battery power, you can either choose a normal or reverse sequence, which determines whether the flight begins at the first or last waypoint. Select the sequence that starts the drone closest to its current position to save battery power. Next, set the length you want your hyperlapse to be. Next, set your picture interval to 2 for smooth video playback, and then press the record button. Here's the Waypoint Hyperlapse we just created. I recommend flying with the wind as I did here so that the drone does not struggle and jump around. The wind on the lake was blowing south as you could see, but the wind in the air where the drone was blowing north as you could see from the clouds. I used the same exact waypoints to fly back against the wind and you could see the difference. The drone is jumping all over the place. One great feature of the Mavic 4 Pro RC2 controller is that it automatically saves any waypoint mission you create in the DJI Fly app. This allows you to return later and refly the exact same route using identical settings. Perfect for capturing the same shot at different times of day or even different seasons. To access your saved missions, tap the document icon on the screen. A list of your previous waypoint flights will appear, organized by date and time. You can also rename any mission by tapping the pencil icon. A few important things to keep in mind. Saved waypoint missions are stored only on the controller or mobile device used to create them. They cannot be transferred or backed up automatically to any other device. Additionally, clearing the DJI Fly app data will permanently delete all saved waypoint missions. A few pro tips for waypoint hyperlapses. First, as with other hyperlapses, don't fly too close to any objects or they will bounce around in the foreground. Second, don't set too high of a picture interval with a shorter distance between two waypoints or the drone footage will not look cinematic. And finally, to get more cinematic footage, try setting your gimbal at one position for the first waypoint and another for the last waypoint. In this hyperlapse, I set the first drone waypoint with the drone at a lower altitude to the ground and the gimbal facing forward, then moved it to a higher altitude and pointed the gimbal down and set that position. Nighttime and hyperlapses, or night lapses as I call them, are a whole different ballgame, and before you try them, there are a few things to consider. First, the drone's collision avoidance does not work at night. I recommend scouting out an area that you want to shoot at night in the daylight to see if there are any power lines, tall trees, or other objects that could be a problem. Second, it's harder to see where your drone is at night because its lights will blend into the lights from the city. Third, there is a lot of helicopter traffic at night and they fly low and are hard to see. Try not to fly over 400 feet, especially at night, or you risk the chance of colliding with other aerial objects. Remember, if you fly your drone 10 feet in the air straight away from you off the side of a mountain that's 1,000 feet in the air towards city lights, it will only think it's 20 feet in the air when it's 1,020 feet in the air. To illustrate the ideal settings for a night lapse, we'll be using a course lock hyperlapse as our example. To set your drone up for night shots, first remove any ND filters. Next, select photo mode, then hyperlapse, then course lock. Next, set the length of your hyperlapse. Next, set your picture interval to 2, which equals 1 picture every 2 seconds, and your speed to 1 mile per hour or less. You want the cars in the scene to be moving fast, but the drone to be moving slow. Next, set your shutter speed to a 1-second exposure. Then set your aperture to as low as it will go. Then set your ISO to auto to see where the drone thinks it needs to be for an even exposure. Then turn off auto ISO. Next, tap the lock button to lock in your course and then tap the shutter button to start. One issue I have found with the Mavic 4 Pro drone is that it sometimes shifts angles in a course lock hyperlapse. I don't know why this happens in non-windy situations, but I have contacted DJI to let them know of the issue. Okay, now that you know how to create time and hyperlapses, I'm going to show you how to edit them. The disadvantages of letting the drone create your time and hyperlapses is that first, it uses JPEG images to create the time lapse, and secondly, it automatically sets the frame rate to 25 frames per second, and you cannot change either of these settings in the controller. If you're posting to YouTube or Instagram like me, you're probably using a 30 frame per second timeline. According to Instagram, 30 frames per second is highly recommended as the standard for reels and stories as it looks smooth on mobile devices. And for YouTube, 30 frames per second is also recommended as the standard for vlogs, interviews, and general content for a realistic look. So, a 25 frame per second clip on a 30 frame per second timeline will look choppy as it's missing 5 frames. I'm going to show you how to edit your hyperlapses with raw images and put them on a 30 frames per second timeline. To start, we need to open the raw images in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Classic. Go to File, Import Photo and Video. Here we have our raw mountain time-lapse images. The file extension for raw drone images is .dng. Next, select Import and wait. There are a lot of images, so it may take a while. Now that we've imported our raw images, we need to edit them, then convert them to JPEGs. To do that, go to the first picture in the sequence and edit it. Here's before, here's after. Once you're happy with your edit, copy this effect to all the rest of the pictures by highlighting them, then select Sync, then select Synchronize. This will create the same edits to all the pictures in the sequence. Next, go to File, then Export. We're going to export them in full resolution and as JPEGs. Now that our raw images have been edited and converted to JPEGs, we need to make them into a video. To do this, go to Adobe Premiere Pro 2025 and select New Project, name it, and select Create. Next, create a new sequence by going to File, New Sequence. In this case, I'm using a 4K UHD at 30 frames per second sequence. Next, select OK. Next, we need to import the edited JPEG pictures by going to File, Import, and select the folder containing the edited JPEG pictures. Next, click on the very first picture in the sequence and you will see an image sequence highlighted. If you accidentally select multiple images, image sequence will not be highlighted and there won't be a check mark, so just select the first image. Next, select Open. Now take the video clip that was created by the images and drag it onto your timeline. When you do that, it's going to say, this clip does not match sequence settings. Do you want to change your sequence? Select Keep Existing Settings. To make your video fill the screen, right-click on the clip and select Fill Frame. So as you can see, when you hit the playback button, that it's bouncy. The drone had a little bit of wind, so it was bouncing around. So we want to fix that with something called Warp Stabilizer. So we're going to go to Windows, Workspaces, Editing, which we're already in. Then we're going to go to the Effects Library, and we're just going to type in Warp, W-A-R-P. You scroll down a little bit, you'll see Warp Stabilizer right here. We're going to drag that onto the clip. All right, it's going to take a bit because it is going through each one of the frames, and it's trying to stabilize them compared to the other frames. So as you can see here, it's only on 5, 6 out of 350. We want to keep this at smooth motion and 50%. You could always redo the effect later and put less stabilization or more stabilization, but I find that 50% is usually about right. Some people like to do 10%, then nest it and add another 10%, nest it and add it. That just wastes a lot of time because it takes a lot of time to do this. As you could see, we're only on frame 31. So we're gonna let this run through and get back. Okay, the warp stabilizer is complete. Let's play it back and see how it looks. Great, as you can see, there's no jumping in the image at all. It looks really good. So here's where we're gonna wanna do a couple final touches. All right, next step we wanna do is export this. So we're gonna go to File, Export, sorry, the mic was in the way. Media, and we're going to name this. So our final thing is going to be called Mountain Hyperlapse 30 frames per second stabilized, and we're going to do this in 4K. And we're going to make sure this is matching source and output, source 3840, output 3840, and export it. Here was the hyperlapse created by the drone. Here's the result of our edits to raw images converted to JPEGs set on a 30 frame per second timeline. This video took about 90 days to create, as there are times that you don't want to shoot timer hyperlapses. There were many days with absolutely no clouds in the sky, and there were many days of the winter inversion here in Utah where the sky is covered with smog and clouds. And even when there was perfect amounts of clouds and no inversion, many times it was too windy for time and hyperlapses. I'm telling you all this because to do hyperlapses right, you're at the mercy of the weather. Don't get frustrated. Pick the right weather and your hyperlapses will be amazing. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notifications on my future tutorials and adventure videos. Thank you for watching.